This is Socially Triggered. In this video, I'm going to debunk a video by David Pakman. One of the questions that most conservatives ask of liberals is how are they going to pay for all their socialism? How are they going to pay the crazy bills that they're very good at offering free stuff, but they never really give good explanations of how to pay for that free stuff. I'm from Canada. And in Canada, we have the NDP party. And the NDP party is the most socialist party we have, really, right next to the Communist Party. But it's one of the major parties still. But they never get elected because people know they're a little too extreme. But the NDP party in Canada, what they do is they promise the earth, moon, sun, everything. Free pony rides, Pegasus for everybody, rainbows and kisses and all that wonderful stuff. They promise it all. And what I've noticed is they can promise that because they know they'll never actually get elected. But they know that some people are dumb enough that they'll vote for them just because they're promised all these wonderful things. And if you're a poorer person and you're not paying taxes, you don't care. You don't really care because it just sounds great. It's all free stuff because you're not paying into the system. So mostly poorer people or younger people who aren't really burdened by taxes, they're more likely to vote left wing because they see the benefit of voting left wing because they don't have to pay for it, yet they get all this free stuff. It's basically take from those rich people, those evil rich people over there, and it's no skin off my back because it's those rich people paying for it, not me. That's the way that they think. And that's generally the way the left thinks. They think it's somebody else paying. It's those evil rich people that are going to pay, not me. And that's kind of the belief that they have. And they think, they don't see the ramifications of their actions. That maybe a better system is stop stealing taxes from people and just let people have their own money. And then they can use that money to invest in their communities. They can open up businesses. They can do more things if they had their own money to use. But the left doesn't understand that. They really want the government to be the ones that, provide all the security and benefits and all that kind of stuff. And it's never free stuff at the end because we all end up paying for it. So I want to look into David Pakman's video. I'm going to play it a little bit so you can see where he came from in his opinions. And he really does try to do a good job of costing out how to pay for all the wonderful goodies that the left seem to want to propose. So I'm going to play his video and I'll show you why his arguments fail.
Subreddit by a user named Ricard58. And it relates to this question that's often discussed in American politics. The right talks about it, the left talks about it, although usually in different terms, which is how do we pay for all the stuff that progressives want to just give away to people? All that free stuff that somebody has to pay for. Medicare for all, tuition-free college, paid family, maternity, paternity leave, the expansion of Social Security benefits, paying for infrastructure. How are we going to pay for all of those things? How are we going to cover the costs that those programs and initiatives represent in terms of the budget on a national scale? And I'm actually going to dig into it today. I'm going to tell you exactly what these things would cost and exactly how we could pay for them. But before I do that, I think it's really important just to remind people that a lot of people on the right who ask that question, how are you going to pay for that? They're asking the question in bad faith. We only ask how to pay for Medicare and tuition-free college. We never ask, as a country I'm talking about, how are we going to pay for that war or those missiles that we are just replacing on an infinite loop? And from a sort of practical perspective, how we pay for it is simple. Congress authorizes the spending, and then the Treasury actually spends the money. Yeah, debt exists, Modern monetary theory tells us that it's not just good or bad to deficit spend. It depends what we're spending on. And there's a lot of things we could deficit spend on that would actually be good for the economy. There's a whole bunch of other rebuttals, but I'm going to actually play it.
So, first of all, I'm just going to address a couple points that he just mentions. One, that people on the right are acting in bad faith. That's actually not true. The reason the people on the right ask the question of how you're going to pay for it is people on the right are very pragmatic. We think, oh, well, if we want to do something, how are we going to come up with those costs? So it's very, right-wing way of thinking that we always think of the costs. So when you think of a government, you always think, okay, well, if there's something new, and these are all new things, well, how do you come up with that new money? And it's just a way of thinking. It's a very right-wing way of thinking. His answer almost reminded me of Justin Trudeau. Justin Trudeau was once asked, well, how will you pay for it? And how will you balance the budget? And Trudeau's response was, the budget will balance itself. And it was just like this kind of moronic statement by Trudeau that just shows complete non-understanding of how economics work. And it kind of showcases how the left thinks. That they think that, oh, the budget will just balance itself. That we can just print... Sorry about that. They think that the budget will just balance itself. We can just print more money. Well, it doesn't work that way. You can't just print more money, because if you print more money, or if you authorize bigger spendings, well, that money has to come from somewhere. So generally what happens is governments will spend more, and they spend more than they actually have. So there will be what's called a deficit. That's not actually the big problem. Deficits can be okay as long as you have a plan in the future to pay that deficit. Because what happens is the deficit creates what's called a debt. And that's really the problem, because debts, you're paying interest on that. And you could be actually paying more interest on your debt, just servicing your debt. Just like when you're buying a house, you have a loan. Well, you're paying interest on that loan. Well, that interest, if the interest rates go up, back in the 80s, the interest rates were like 15 to 20%. Well, in Canada, for example, we were paying more just to service the debt, not even pay it down, just to pay the interest costs. We were paying more than anything else that the government paid for. That means more than medical. We have free medical care in Canada, well, what's called free medical care. And it was more expensive just paying that debt than paying for medical care. So the debt is a very dangerous thing. And when you have a deficit, you're basically adding to that debt and making the problem bigger and bigger each year. So what he just said was just insane. It's just lacking of that understanding of basic economics. That you really want to avoid creating a deficit, and you also want to do as much as you can to reduce the debt, because reducing the debt means that you'll have more money that you won't have to use to service the debt. So you can devote more of that money to actually providing other services. Because debt servicing, which is totally useless, it's just paying interest on a big amount of money that you owe, is a real drain on the system. So yeah, we don't want that. That's bad. So already he's not off to a good start. He's showing his left-wing leadings. So let's listen to some more.
I'm going to play the game at its face in this segment. I'm going to ignore all the externalities, for example, the fact that healthcare reduces crime and things like infrastructure reduce pollution, and modernizing transit also does that. Let's ignore all of those externalities and just play the game that the right claims to want to play, which is how do we pay for it? I'm going to give you options that you can pick from today. So first, let's look at some programs and what they would cost. Some of these, it's hard to get an exact number because you have to account for direct costs, indirect costs, savings, all of that stuff. But here are some numbers we can work with today, all right? Here's my list of free stuff from liberals that we've got to figure out how to pay for. Medicare for all would cost an additional estimated 1.2 trillion a year. We already spend a lot of money on healthcare. Medicare for all would cost an additional 1.2 trillion. Tuition-free public college, 80 billion a year. Paid family, paternal, maternal leave, based on some proposals that we've seen in terms of how it would be calibrated, would cost about 32 billion a year. Social Security expansion, about 120 billion a year. So what we're talking about is 1.432 trillion, or if we think in billions, we're talking about 1,432 billions. Let's flip it now. What proposals exist to raise money to pay for things? And after, I'll let you decide.
So he laid out the things that they want to do. I'm going to just look at the very first one. I could really break down all the other ones, but Medicare for all, we have it in Canada, and it's very dangerous. It's actually a very bad system. More people in Canada actually die waiting for healthcare than people, percentage-wise, die in the US because they can't afford healthcare. So what ends up happening is whenever you have what's considered free, people lose value. They lose insight into how much that thing is really worth. So if I think, oh, it's a free service, I'll just use it whenever I want because it doesn't cost me anything. That's the mindset that we have. And what ends up happening is it creates an abuse of the system. And people don't really appreciate it. So what happens, it becomes abused and the waiting lines get longer and longer. So even essential surgery that you need, because it's essential, can take months. I needed an MRI and I made a video about this. You can check out my other videos. I did a video where I just needed an MRI. And I could have gotten in Korea or any other country where you can pay for these things. I could have gotten that MRI that day if I needed it. In Canada, I had to wait 2 years, and I really had to beg my doctors to give me the approval to get an MRI. And I really needed it. So that's how it works in Canada. It's not a good system. You don't want that system in the US. It's just a bad system. So he's saying that it's going to cost 1.2 additional trillion dollars per year. I did a quick Google search. I'm going to show you the numbers that I found on Google. So here's the cost for you. So how much would Medicare for all cost? And then they say that it's going to cost between 27.7 trillion to 32.1 trillion. Okay? Well, that works out to 2.7 trillion per year. I mean, that's, I'm not sure where he's getting this additional, so I'm not sure what the baseline is, but the point is it's probably higher than what he's thinking. It's probably more like an extra 2 trillion per year that it's going to cost to replace the current system in the US with a Medicare for all system. So the fact that he says it's 1.2 trillion and it's actually more like 2 trillion seems like probably all of his other numbers are probably skewed the same way, where they're way underestimating the costs. And that's assuming that no additional healthcare requests are done. And also within the left, they have a tendency of asking for more. And what I mean by that is if you listen to the Democratic Convention presentations, a lot of them said that they would provide health care for all. I mean, for all. Meaning that anyone that just sneaks into the country and needs health care, they would get medical care for free. And that's a burden to the American system. So if I needed like heart surgery, well, hey, I might as well just sneak into the US and they'll pay for it. That's the kind of system that will happen, because when you offer something for free, people are going to abuse that. And especially the left that proposes have a tendency of wanting it for people that are not even American. And that's very, very dangerous. So already I'm seeing a problem in his numbers. that it's probably double what his numbers are. But let's assume that those numbers, let's even pretend that his numbers are correct. And I'm going to show you why his numbers are even worse than even if they're correct. Okay, so let's go, I'll just
decide which sound more or less interesting, which sound okay or which don't. How to pay for all of that free stuff liberals want to give you. Here's examples, then we'll add them up. If we reverse the Bush tax cuts, we would raise $488 billion a year. If we reverse the Trump tax cuts, we would raise $164 billion a year. If we ended the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan, we would raise $127 billion a year. In terms of ideas to pay specifically for Medicare for all, if we add a 7.5% employer payroll tax on companies, but we exempt the first $2 million in payroll. If you're a business with $100,000 in payroll, you're exempted. You pay nothing. The idea is to protect smaller businesses. We could raise 390. It says million, but it's actually billion. That's my mistake. And that would, on average, actually save businesses $9,000 a year. We could add a 4% taxpayer tax on income, exempting the first $29,000 a year. That would raise $350 billion a year. It would net save families, because remember, families are already paying for premiums and co-pays and all of that. If we did a carbon tax of $73 per ton on businesses, we could raise $300 billion a year. A wealth tax, similar to what Elizabeth Warren has proposed, if you tax wealth above $50 million at 2% and wealth above $1 billion at 3%, you would raise $275 billion per year.
Okay, so let's look at some of these things. So reversing tax cuts. Now, a lot of people don't realize this, that one of the things that Trump did right, and you might not like Trump, I'm not trying to defend Trump necessarily 100% on this, but one of the things that he did do right was he did two things. He had these tax cuts for not just for people, but for businesses. And what that did was it stimulated the economy. Because businesses now, instead of parking their money overseas, they decided, hey, let's keep that money in the US. Let's invest in the US. Because when you start taxing a lot, companies, they don't really want to put your money where they're being taxed. They want to take it and put it somewhere else where it's safer. So a lot of the times when you actually do tax cuts, instead of the revenue falling, it actually goes up for the governments. And they found that if you tax too much, it actually can reduce how much money the governments can collect. So reversing these tax cuts could actually have the opposite effect. So to make the assumption that these tax cuts would actually mean that there would be more money in the government is a very false assumption. Because some of the economic recovery that's occurred in the US is due to these tax cuts. So I don't think you can even count on either of those first two. Now, ending the wars in Afghanistan and Iraq, it doesn't actually save as much money as you might think. Because you still have a military. You still have to pay for those soldiers. They might not be in Iraq or Afghanistan, but you're still paying for those soldiers. You're still paying for that equipment. Generally, you won't save as much as you might think. And you might create other problems that might actually lead to bigger issues. The war in Afghanistan and Iraq are horrible. I'm very much against them. And I'm against American interventionism, actually, as a whole. But you can't just end them and expect everything to go well. That was actually one of the mistakes Obama made, whereas he said, we're going to end the war on such and such a date, and it caused actually the increase in spending, because what ended up happening was the people that they were basically defending against said that, oh, well, we just wait until this date and then we can sort of lay low for a little while, and once that date comes across, well, we'll take over the country again and make everything just back to the crappy place it was before. So what happens is you can't just pull out, and it's just not practical on a military or logistical terms. So yeah, it's not that easy. But I'd love to save that money personally too. Just I'm not sure how realistic it is. So the next one is this 7.5 employer payroll tax. Now that sounds like you might not understand what that means. It just means that your company has to pay for the employees an extra tax for them. Well, what that means indirectly is like if I'm paying $10,000 a year for an employee, and my company, makes has X number of employees, like a Walmart, a big employer, it's probably paying out billions of dollars in salaries, each month even. But the point is, all of a sudden now you're adding 7.5 tax on those employees that the company has to pay. Well, that money has to come from somewhere. So these companies were like, well, we either pay our employees less to cover this cost, or we charge more for goods. So again, this is like a very negative thing to the economy because businesses have to come up with that extra money. So sure, it saves you 400 billion, roughly. He says 390 billion, but it might actually cost more to the economy. It might actually hurt the very people that are the least able to afford such a tax, because these people now, it's these low income jobs. There's lots of them within Walmarts and the McDonald's and so forth, where they would have these more than $2 million in payroll. And there's usually like small businesses don't usually, they don't have like that many employees. So they're well under that threshold that he talked about. But they're not usually paying McDonald's wages. They're usually paying a lot more. So those types of jobs would actually be protected, the middle wage jobs. But it's the low income jobs that would actually be hit the hardest by such a tax. And I always thought the left was about trying to help the poorest people. Well, this tax would hurt the poorest people the most, because it's going to be affecting those large companies that have a lot of employees that are generally paying more closer to those minimum wage salaries. So it'd really impact them the most, and it would be a very bad thing. So that's the employer payroll tax. Then they're saying this 4% taxpayer tax on income above a certain amount. So this is another one of those extra taxes. Like now, everybody in the US would make 4% less. Okay, and they always say it saves money, but really it doesn't save money. Whenever there's an extra tax, it's just an extra tax. It doesn't save anybody anywhere. So it's just an extra tax. Bad. I think I'd rather have 4% more income than having all these free things that really don't benefit. So 4% is not a safe thing at all. The next one is carbon tax, and I hate carbon taxes. It's stupid on every level. Even if you're for promoting like a clean environment and all this stuff, it has never been shown that carbon taxes actually work. Countries have, like Australia, tried to put a carbon tax in, and it actually increased the environmental damage that was being done. Because what ends up happening is companies generally try to do things that are efficient. They try to improve their technology and stuff. But all of a sudden what was happening is money was getting stripped out of those companies so that they couldn't improve their infrastructure. And they basically were producing more pollution. It was not a good system. So a carbon tax is bad for the environment, and it hurts businesses. And when businesses get hurt, the economy gets weaker. Then when your economy gets weaker, you get less tax from that economy. So I don't believe that this would actually raise money. I think it actually would hurt the economy so much. You might break even on it, but you would not raise money. Often even just adding these kind of taxes, it adds a whole layer of administrative costs to the government, which could actually be more expensive than just collecting the tax. It's happened in many countries where when they put in the carbon tax that it actually costs more to administrate it than they collect from it. So very bad idea. Now this last one, I hate the most. Of all these ones, I hate the most. This wealth tax. Now, most people don't understand wealth tax. They think, oh, these rich people, they just hoard their money, blah, blah, blah. It's just that kind of situation. And they think these really evil rich people are just swimming in pools of money and so forth. They don't understand what wealth really is. And what wealth generally is if I own a company and it's worth $1 billion. And so my value as a wealthy person is $1 billion. I own $1 billion company. Wow, I'm rich. I don't actually have $1 billion. I own a company that's worth $1 billion. There's a big difference in that. And the difference is this. I can't just pull out 2% of that company every year and give it to the government. It doesn't work that way. It's a business. The money is in the business. It's not that I actually tangibly have $1 billion. It's that business is worth $1 billion. So removing 2% could actually bankrupt a business. It could, because most of these companies are running on really tight margins. So a wealth tax of 2% is huge. There's some industries that are huge. I mean, they're massive. Like airline industries, some of these like oil and gas, mining, mineral stuff like that. They have really small margins. You wouldn't believe, like 2% is probably their actual margins on their profit margins. And you basically were saying, well, we're going to take that profit margin because we're taking 2% of the wealth, that individual's wealth. Well, their company is their wealth. So it's just like insanity. And then 3% once it gets over $1 billion. So it's even more likely to be the case that more, like as you go up in that scale, like if you think of like the Jeff Bezos of the world, well, he's worth over $100 billion. You think, wow, he's worth $100 billion. He's got $100 billion in his pocket. No, he doesn't. He has $100 billion of value in his company. Well, if you take 3% of the value out of a company, well, that's pretty major. It can actually bankrupt a company. And we actually saw this happen in the UK, where they had inheritance taxes, and they would bankrupt. Basically these super rich families that had these like legacy wealth would go bankrupt over years because they'd gradually be chipped away by these taxes. And that's what a wealth tax does. It just chips away at the value of a company. And what companies will do, like if you look at Google and you look at Facebook and Apple, what they'll do is they're big companies and they have lots and lots of money. So they know that the government in the US is a little bit weird, and they want to be taxed. The government wants to tax these big companies. So what they'll do is if a tax rate goes up, they'll become a different company. They'll go to a different country and incorporate in those countries. So Google, for example, is Irish. And the reason they're Irish as a company, and it's known as Alphabet, is that they don't have to pay those high taxes in Ireland that they do in the US. So that's what companies will do. They'll move their money. So they don't want to pay this crazy tax. So often like the left wing will project these really big numbers. Oh, if we tax the rich people, there's all these rich people. If we tax them 2%, only 2%, they say. They make it sound like it's really small, and we'll collect billions of dollars. Well, it doesn't work that way because these companies are smart. They're not going to waste. They don't want to waste $275 billion. They'll put the money elsewhere. And what does that do? That hurts the economy. So whenever you create these taxes, there's always an opposite effect where money will be transferred out. So wealth tax is very, very dangerous. And if you think about it, my phone keeps on ringing. So if you think about it though, when we have these crazy taxes, we we have to come up with the money from somewhere. Everyone thinks that if you just tax, that it's going to benefit people. It doesn't work that way. Especially a wealth tax. That money, in order to create that wealth, that's like money, like you've already paid your taxes. Okay, you've already paid, let's say you got $1,000 after taxes from the government. That's all your money you saved from the government, right? You've paid your taxes to the government, you've paid all your deductions and stuff, and you have that $1,000. And you save and save and save, and you constantly build that money up. And then you get to the billion mark. Wow, you're pretty awesome. But the point is, you've paid taxes to get to that point. And it's then that the government says, well, no, we want more money from you. You've paid your taxes, but now that you're paying more on top of that. You're being taxed on a tax, in this case. It's just not fair. Because we should have a point where we can say, hey, this is our money. This is what we've earned. We've paid our taxes, we paid our dues to get this money. And we shouldn't be responsible to constantly give that money away. I hope that makes sense. It just seems a little bit unfair to me that somebody's just coming in and saying, hey, I really like your stuff. I'm just going to take your stuff. And that's what these taxes are, especially this wealth one. It's really just people saying, I really like your stuff, and they're just stealing your stuff. Okay, so let's look at some of the more. He has more of these crazy things that I'm going to play for you right now.
Some other ways to raise money. If we increase top marginal tax rates, if you create a 40% rate between $250,000 and $500,000 a year, and a 45% rate from $500,000 to $2 million a year, and then it's I believe supposed to be 50% rate between $2 and $10 million a year, and then a 52% rate above $10 million a year. These are taxes on really high earners. You raise $180 billion. If we raise the Social Security payroll cap from currently it's around $128,000 to $250,000, you raise $120 billion per year. There are Wall Street speculation taxes, which we could put in place, 0.5% on trades, 0.1% on bonds, 0.005% on derivative trades. That would raise $55 billion per year. We could look at estate taxes. You could do a 45% tax on estates over $3.5 million, and then a 50% tax on estates over $10 million, 55% estate tax when you get to $50 million estates. And if people are passing on estates bigger than $1 billion, a 77% estate tax. That would raise $31.5 billion. We could end fossil fuel subsidies. That would raise $26 billion. There's an accounting measure called LIFO, which means last in, first out. You don't have to understand what it is, but eliminating that would raise $11.2 billion. And if we raised the long-term capital gains rate from 15% to 20%, that would raise $5 billion. Now, you don't need near
I'm just going to rewind just so you can see his numbers again. So these are the last things that he proposes on how to pay for it. And I'm going to go through these last ones. Basically, the next part of the video that he does, and I think he does a pretty good job of it, the second part, and I'm not going to show it, just so you know, it's just not worth showing, is he basically has these two lists, and he's going to say you can pick and choose from these two lists of all the things that we can do to pay for it, pay for all these free stuff that we want to give you, and you can just pick and choose which ones you think are the best. Okay, that was his solution. So he does a good job of that. I don't think it really needs to be rebutted, but I'd rather look at all of the things and say, hey, look, they're all flawed. So I'm going to continue doing that with the ones that are on the screen right now. So the first one, increase the top marginal tax rates. Again, when you increase the rates, it incentivizes people to find ways of hiding their money. Like if I can pay an accountant $2,000 and it results in a savings of $5,000, I'm going to take that investment. I'm going to make that choice. If it's something where the rate's low, I might say, so if you can save money, you'll do so. You'll find a way to say, hey, instead of spending it on the government, I can spend a little bit here on an accountant and not have to waste that money. Or if the rates are really low, as I was saying, you could say, well, it's too much to pay for an accountant. I might as well just bear the cost of having to pay the extra taxes and so forth. I'll just pay those extra taxes. So the point is, once you raise the marginal income taxes, well, you're incentivizing people to hide money, to find ways to get a better accountant to hide the money. And what people don't realize is that the top 20% of income earners in the US actually pay 80% of all the taxes that are collected in the US. So the top earners in the US are actually paying their fair share. You'd expect that it would be pretty balanced throughout, but actually the poorest people in the US don't pay any taxes. They get way more into the system, from the system that they put into the system. And generally what you're doing is when you raise taxes on the wealthy, you're incentivizing people to become poorer and get more benefit. Because, why work so hard? If I'm just going to keep on paying more, why work so hard? And I don't get any benefit from it, why work so hard? So you're incentivizing people to work less. And what that does is it kills the economy. And when they've done studies, and every time they raise taxes or lower taxes, it always works out that the benefit is kind of balanced out. That the benefits that you get from lowering taxes actually works out that you collect more money because people can spend more money. They're more likely to invest in their companies. They're more likely to grow the economy. And even though you're getting less percentage-wise, you're working on a bigger market, like a bigger economy. So you get actually more revenue as a government. So there's actually a lot of incentive to reduce taxes because it actually means more money rather than less money for the government. There's a balance, right, with that. That if you lower the taxes too much, well, obviously you're not going to have any tax revenue. So obviously there's a balance, but raising it is probably breaking that balance. So let's look at the numbers. 40%, 45%. AOC even had like 90% at the very tippy top, she said. So the thing is they try to basically tax the rich, and there's very little benefit from it that you get because all that happens is the rich move their money. It's just obvious. I heard that if you actually taxed all of the top 20% of the U.S. At 90%, like AOC had suggested, they would only account for about just under $1 trillion worth of additional revenue for the government. And that's assuming that they wouldn't just hide their money. So you'd bankrupt really, really your wealthiest people, your most successful people, you'd bankrupt them, and you'd still not generate enough to pay for anything. So yeah, it's so silly. The next one is raise Social Security payroll cap to 250,000. I'm not really sure how true this is. I'm not really sure the benefits of it. I'm not as familiar with the details of the payroll cap. I have a feeling, though, that basically it means that people who earn more will often not get anything from Social Security, which basically is just another way of saying screw the rich. The next one is Wall Street speculation tax, where they have this 0.5% on trades. Wow. Sounds like very little. Sounds like, oh, it's only a small percentage. But imagine all the trades that happen in the US, where stocks and stuff are being traded. And these stocks, when they're being traded, basically it's a way of injecting money into businesses. That's what stock market does. It injects money into different businesses because businesses can use stocks as a way to raise capital. Well, if all of a sudden you have 1%, half a percent on trades, well, that's going to discourage people from doing many transactions. So the money will all of a sudden become less liquid. All of a sudden people will be like, okay, I'm going to be really careful about my trades because now every time I'm going to be dinged this 0.5%. And it'll just eat away, like especially if you're doing like a whole bunch of micro transactions, like a whole bunch of trades, it'll basically just eat away your whole investment. So that would be horrible. That'd be really horrible because you want to keep the economy, the market as free as possible because that allows for rapid collection of money for businesses. It allows for businesses to really shift and adjust the way that they need. And if you're like cutting that, it was the very big concern that they had during the financial crisis in 2008, that they worried that the banks were just going to freeze up all the money and that they weren't going to invest anymore. And the US government actually spent trillions of dollars during the Obama years on just injecting money into the economy to get around this fact that that basically the banks weren't willing to lend money and that money became very, very tight. Well, anything where you put a tax on trades, you're basically creating that same situation where all of a sudden money becomes incredibly tight and there's no trading, there's no activity because people, they don't want to be dinged every time they make a trade. And generally you're making hundreds and hundreds of trades, like it's rapid. So, if you trade the same stock 100 times, well, half of the money's gone just from trading. So you don't want to do that. It's very dangerous. The 1% on bonds, same idea, and derivative trades. Derivatives are stocks that pay a different rates and stuff. Again, this is like things that would have lots of transactions. And again, you don't want to cut down how active the market is. You're basically saying, hey, well, we want to slow down the market. This is a good way of doing it. The next one is estate taxes. And this is like, in Canada, fortunately, we don't have estate taxes. But estate taxes are brutal. I never liked the idea of estate tax. Because think of it this way. You work your whole life. You build up this whole investment, like you buy a house, you raise all this money, and you want to create what's called a legacy for your family, your children, and you want to leave something to them when you die. You don't want to leave a financial burden, you want to leave something beneficial to them. Well, imagine if everything that you're going to give them, the government takes half of it. Well, that could be very detrimental. Especially if the money's tied up in a house. Can you imagine, you have to sell the house and then you have to split the money with the government? It could be that the children actually live in that house. Well, all of a sudden, the government now owns half the house that you're living in. So very, very dangerous. Horrible system. You don't want to have, you want to avoid state taxes. These are all things where you're taxing money that's already been taxed. They've earned that money. It should be their money to keep, or give to somebody else. And in this case, these estate taxes would basically steal from the dead. So yeah, horrible system. This is one way to really cripple the growth what you want to do actually as a country and as a family is you want to create legacy. And that means, like, if I can create enough wealth in my family and I can pass that wealth on to my children, that gives my children an advantage, because they'll have that money that they can use for school or for living or buying their own houses, whatever. The goal of as a good parent is to create that legacy for my children and for them to do the same for their children. But if we all do that as a nation, that's a good thing. And we don't want to discourage that, because what's going to happen is if you create this high estate tax, well, it's only going to encourage people to say, well, before I die, I better just spend that money, get rid of it, and have no plan for the future for my children. Very bad idea. I could probably do a video just on how much I hate estate taxes. And fossil fuel subsidies. A lot of fossil fuel subsidies is one of those highly misunderstood things. Often it's the case that they're subsidizing exploration and development, and that actually creates jobs within a local economy. So really, it's the same thing that happened with Amazon when they were trying to build into New York. The subsidies are actually encouraging the company to come in, and the city actually will make more money in tax revenue because the company will invest in that city. So usually a subsidy actually has a benefit more than it's just basically a tax swap. So yeah, it's one of those things that's highly misunderstood. It's whenever people say, oh, the fossil fuel companies, they're getting huge subsidies, they don't understand that those subsidies are really being used to generate jobs within an economy, in a local economy, I should say. So it's highly misunderstood. And LIFO accounting, I have no idea about that, so I'm not even going to comment. Sure, they save 11 billion. We're talking trillions, and 11 billion is next to nothing. So I'm going to give them that one, because I don't know anything about it. Long-term capital gains. So long-term capital gains. So capital gains is one of those things where you're investing money, and basically you've invested in something, it's gone up in value, and when you cash out on it, you pay a tax on how much you've gained on your investment. For example, if you sell your house, you bought your house for $1 million and you sell it for $2 million, well, you pay a tax on that capital gains. Well, what ends up happening is if you start taxing people on their profits, where they've made this investment, it could really, really hurt a lot of people from investing in things, because it's basically stealing the money. I always see taxes as theft, just so you know. It's stealing money from people who have made a good investment, and now the government is basically saying, we're going to take that investment from you. So yeah, I hate all these taxes. I'd rather, one of the things as a very conservative person, as a very small government person, one of the things that I always think about is not how to raise more taxes. Because to me, taxes are just, if you give the government $1, you know that maybe you get 10 cents out from that government, because they'll put it into administrative things, they'll talk about the money, and they'll do all this thing, and then maybe out of all that dollar, you get maybe 10 cents worth of actual value. Well, if I kept my dollar, I could get 100% the value for my dollar, because I would use that dollar in a way that would most benefit me. With the government, you don't have that. You know, even if you get 10 cents back, it's probably not even you that gets it back. It's probably used somewhere else. So often the case is governments are very, very wasteful. It's not a very efficient way of investing money. And what ends up happening is the more money you give the government, the better they are at wasting it. I'd rather see less and less taxes, less and less waste of government money, reducing the size of the government, and encouraging them to be more efficient. So these are my opinions on it. I really don't think that any of these are good solutions on how to pay for these crazy free stuff that the left want to give. Again, it ends up being that the way the left deals with problems is they either think that we can print more money or the rich can pay for it. And that's generally what these are. These are just, let's tax the rich more. Those rich people have so much money, let's take it all from them, without really understanding how money is created and how wealth is created and what the rich actually do for the economy. The rich are not the evil people that the government wants you to believe they are. There's actually some benefit to having these wealthy people that create jobs and do things to benefit the economy. So that's my opinion. I'd love to hear your feedback on this. I hope that I've done a reasonable job of debunking some of the stuff that David Pakman has said. I think it's all of them I just see as horrible ideas. But I'd love to hear your opinion, and you can tell me I'm totally wrong. I don't mind, people challenging my ideas. So please comment, like, subscribe, all that wonderful stuff, and give me your feedback. Thank you. Bye.